me tell you what I mean by that. Because a large amount of my revenues are outside the United States, I have to build close to a reasonable market. So it depends on the market segment, it depends on the technology I'm using. But I don't wake up in the morning and say my preference is to actually employ Americans. My preference is to employ great people anywhere in the world where the business is needed for them to be. And I think that question, that kind of a question, which I get asked a lot, is one that it does start the debate from the wrong perspective. It starts the debate from you have a choice between an American and a German, and you choose the German. You have a choice between an American and a German, yes, but you have to have the market actually define where the people are employed or they're not.
So you're saying one of the major factors, of course, is that you want to be close to your customer.
You want to be close to your customer.
But back to government policies, we talked about education, we talked about immigration policy. John, you almost made a pivot to tax policy. And I guess what I'm trying to get to is, are government policies encouraging you to hire Americans, or are they discouraging you from hiring Americans?
They're moving towards encouraging, but they are discouraging now.
How are they discouraging?
Tax policies, just what I call unfunded mandate. The burden of an employee, of having an employee, that's a cost burden, is actually very high, very, very high. And so these are things that we just have to get our heads around and make sure that we encourage, that we make it neutral, that we make it a choice that's a neutral choice, that I can say a German employee and a U.S. employee and say, okay, it's a neutral choice. Right now there is a burden, a heavier burden on the U.S. employee than it is there.
I think it's going to be a requirement if you're going to go around the world. You must invest in those countries.
Exactly.
And it's true of countries that are doing business with the U.S. They must invest in the U.S. if we're going to be a market for it. Having said that, I actually have a preference for hiring here in America because of my industry. We increased our headcount in America by 10% last year. And it is that innovation that you get in Silicon Valley, 128, RTP, while other parts of the world are growing on it, it still is unique. I still do 80% of my acquisitions in the US if I can. The problem is everything is working against it at the present time, from where the engineers are to where the new IPOs are. I only have $4 billion in cash in America. I have $40 billion overseas. I'm going to spend that money. I'm either going to buy companies in Northern Europe, which I did this last year, or in China, which I did this last year, or in India, which I did this last year, or I'm going to buy companies in America and hire here.
I think you have the money back.
John, I think you have to explain. You're saying you have that money here, and the reason you can't bring it back is because it'll be taxed again here, right?
It's double taxed. We're only one of 5 countries in the world that have an arcane tax policy that it taxes profits twice. Every other major competitor we have, with the exception of 4 small countries, has a territorial policy. What that very simply says is we pay taxes in India and China and in Europe, and if we bring it back, we pay the highest taxes in the world again.
So you keep your money overseas, and you kind of have to invest it there, and if you brought it back here, you'd pay some tax, and you'd hire people, and they'd be paying taxes, and it would help. It would be a stimulus package, right?
You're in essence spending 70 cents on the dollar. No person in the right mind is going to do that. And so this is one of the simplest levers to pull. If you really want to say, what are the 5 or 6 things we can do to get unemployment down an extra point this next year, this would be one of the 5. You've got $1.2 trillion overseas by 654 American companies. You could bring back probably $800 billion of that. You'd probably get a small tax, let's say 40, 50 billion off of that. And that's the best. That's besides the whole stimulus package.
John, can I push back on that? Because that happened under President Clinton, and his criticism afterwards was, well, yeah, we taxed it a little bit, but it was just returned to shareholders in the form of dividends. It didn't create any new jobs. It didn't create any new innovation or investment. How would you change it this time?
Well, first, I think people have answered that one way too quickly. If I can, under President Clinton's last 6 years of his jobs, 22 million American jobs were created. 22 million. Not decreasing by 6 million like we've done in the last 2 years. 22 million increase. Secondly, if you build a factory here, if you acquire a company here, that's where your future growth is going to be. Every other major country in the world encourages people to make their earnings elsewhere, bring it back and invest in your country. We double penalize it. It is not logical, and that money's not coming back.
No,
Gary,
I
his money at that rates.
That's the point that's raised.
Right.
And it's difficult to get the right facts to argue against.
Right.
I simply say, what good is it doing the United States today to have $1 trillion outside the United States? I don't get it. You know, we've all said our growth is there. We all said we can reinvest it. I don't understand what good it's doing this country to have $1 trillion. Now let me just make two other points. One is, I'm not sure a lot of people agree with me, but I actually think I'm right? Which is,
Ursula,
I think markets.
We'll just start
I
out
think
with that assumption.
jobs, you know, it's not jobs go where the markets are. You know, I never apologize for putting a factory in China if my growth is going to be in China. I'm not going to apologize for that. Now, that being said, I actually think the days of just pure labor arbitrage have ended. You know, in other words, if you look at, we can make a refrigerator now in less than 2 hours of labor. We're going to make refrigerators in the United States and not Mexico and China. I can put backroom centers today in the United States for maybe a 10% cost disadvantage versus India. Pretty close. So nothing is forever. You know, the dynamics of management practices, productivity, the role of information technology, you know, a lot of American workers are a lot more competitive than they were 20 or 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And American business people have to acknowledge that by creating jobs here. So that's point number one. Point number two, you know, all of us run companies that align goals, measurements, and how you spend your time. If you're in Washington and you think your goal is to create jobs, you have no measurements around it and you're not spending your time doing it. So I just think there has to be some alignment around, if our job is growth, competitiveness, and jobs, we as a governmental structure and business associated with that have to do a better job of aligning our purpose around that.
Extremely well said.
Very well said. And we spoke about the educational system, we spoke about tax policy, and the next thing to talk about is exports.
Absolutely. Let's
So
talk about
if you think about it, we have, it's back to the trillions of dollars, billions of dollars outside the United States. What good does it do outside the United States? Closing the border, meaning making it difficult to do business with a huge customer base, billions of dollars, because we make it difficult for them to do business with us, seems also just very illogical. It's hard to explain. I'm on the President's Export Council, and when I got on this, I actually started reading a whole bunch of stuff, and I was amazed at the illogic. It's just not logical.
Could you give an example?
So Korea, we just passed, thank goodness, Korea.
Not yet in Congress.
I know, we got it out of the first, stranglehold. Out of that, it has to go to Congress. What difficulty, what pain could it be for us to say, yes, we want to trade openly with Korea? There are a lot of people over there. They have money. We have technology and goods that they probably want to buy. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. Why does it take so long? Because we've actually wrapped this very logical thing in a lot of other discussions. They're taking our jobs. There are people who have to come. They educated here and they leave. It's become a debate not around the substance, but around some other things. I just say, keep it simple. Keep it simple. 6 billion people. Only 300 million of them live in our country.
And yet we haven't signed a trade. South America, Asia, Europe have all furiously entering trade agreements.
And we have.
How does that affect us in terms of innovation?
Having a big market. This is back to the point that Jeff and John said. Having a market drives innovation and drives investment that drives innovation.
So without those trade agreements, it's
without
tougher to manufacture in the U.S.
It's tougher to justify an investment. If you say, no, I'm not going to be able to sell it in the world, you say, well, I'm not going to spend a lot of money on turbines. Why would I spend money on turbines if I have 300 million people who can buy them? It's not even 300 million people, but whatever the number is in this country. If you open up the world to your product set, to the chance of having your product set, I think you drive investment directly.
Let me take a chance at kind of tying the two concepts together. It's a very complex, multiple variable equation we're talking about. There are only about 6 or 7 variables. And if you address each one of them in a logical way, you can make progress very rapidly. How do you really create an environment for exports and encourage job creation in the country? How do you create an education system covering your short-term gaps, intermediate gaps, long-term? How do you build out the best infrastructure in the world for this? How does government and business work together to create jobs, do no harm? And how do we really collaborate together? Those are all within our grasp. But what you've seen at this show is the speed of innovation does not match our decision process.
As a government, you mean?
As a government or business to the ease of doing all the above.
Okay.
If you're 1 year behind at this show, you're toast. And yet the policies and programs we're talking about, from everything how patents get approved, to encouraging exports, to bringing back money, to even get an improvement of how many green cards can you allocate as a year-by-year basis, we've got to get rid of that, because the speed is what it's all about here. We're falling behind on speed. And I think the U.S. has the cards to win here and to get in the top 5 categories in every group again. But to Jeff's point and Ursula's group, we've got to start measuring it. We're falling behind on IPOs, we're falling behind on graduates, we're falling behind on startups, we're falling behind on job creation. And let's start making every decision on how we get that back in line. Because innovation, we are the best in the world at.
And why is it? Let's talk about that, because we've scored ourselves as a country pretty honestly and harshly. But what are the good things? We talked about our university system, we talked about the American people. We haven't talked about we're a melting pot of diversity, which actually I think puts us ahead of everyone else. What else makes us good?
Look, I think entrepreneurship,
the sense of
this is still the most innovative, both the entrepreneurs themselves and the financial community, behind it. I still think we're the most innovative entrepreneurial. I would say the way we govern corporate governance. I don't mean by that board relations and things like that. I mean the fact that, look, I've hung around Cisco and Xerox. You know that anybody in Cisco has access to John. Anybody in Xerox has access to Ursula. That is different in other countries around the world. So the way that we interact with each other, I think, is a huge competitive advantage.
Do you think we're more honest and we're willing to tell each other that we're not doing a good job or something?
No, there's just no doubt about it. I think there's plenty of flaws really with companies, and as you get bigger, the battle with the bureaucracy is profound. But I've crawled around a lot of companies in 100 countries around the world. We still do it pretty well. And the last one I would say is just both from the factory floor all the way through. This is a very productive culture. The access to information technology tools, the way they've been applied on the factory floor, the amount of cost we've been able to take out and things like that. So we've got a lot of competitiveness going forward.